No one noticed the small widow sitting alone in the last pew of the church, her hands folded tightly around a worn purse. She looked invisible, like someone the world had already moved past. But inside that purse was a secret gift, one that would quietly touch lives far beyond what anyone could imagine. Before the story begins, take a moment to support stories like this. If you enjoy heartfelt, true-to-life stories that remind us of the power of kindness, please subscribe to Kindness Story Hub, like this video, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps keep these stories alive and reaching more hearts. Now, let me tell you the story of Margaret Lewis. Had been a widow for 7 years. Her husband, Thomas, had died suddenly of a heart attack just 2 weeks after his retirement. One day, they were talking about traveling the country in a small RV. The next day, she was choosing a casket alone. Since then, life had become quiet. Too quiet. Margaret lived in a modest house on the edge of a small Midwestern town. It was the same house she and Thomas had raised their children in. But now the rooms echoed. Her son lived across the country, busy with his own family. Her daughter called when she could, but life always seemed to get in the way. Margaret understood. She never complained. She lived carefully on her widow's pension and Social Security. Every dollar mattered. She clipped coupons, turned off lights, and mended old clothes instead of buying new ones. Some months were harder than others, but she managed. What no one knew was that Margaret had a habit. Every Friday afternoon, she walked to the local grocery store and sat on a bench near the entrance. She didn't go to shop. She went to watch. She watched tired mothers juggling crying babies in grocery bags. She watched elderly men counting coins before reaching the checkout. She watched teenagers buying instant noodles, clearly stretching their last few dollars, and every time, her heart ached. Margaret remembered the years when money had been tight for her and Thomas. She remembered nights when kindness from a stranger, a free coffee, a neighbor's casserole, a few extra dollars slipped into her hand had made all the difference. She never forgot those moments. So she decided to become one of those strangers. Inside her old purse was a stack of envelopes. Each one held a small amount of cash, sometimes $10, sometimes $20. It wasn't much. But it was something. Margaret never handed the envelopes directly to people. She was too shy for that. Instead, she had a system that if she saw a mother struggling to pay, Margaret would quietly approach the cashier after the woman left and say, "Please put this toward the last customer's bill." If she noticed someone short on change, she would slip an envelope into their shopping cart when they weren't looking. Sometimes she left envelopes on car windshields with a simple note that said, "You are not alone. No name." No explanation, just kindness. She did this every week. At home, Margaret lived simply so she could afford these small gifts. She skipped treats for herself. She turned down the heat. She said no to new shoes. And every time she placed an envelope into someone's life, she felt a warmth that filled the emptiness in her chest. One winter morning, a heavy snowstorm hit the town. The roads were slick, and the grocery store was unusually crowded. Margaret almost stayed home that day, but something told her to go. She noticed a young man at the checkout arguing softly with the cashier. He couldn't afford all his groceries. His face was red with embarrassment as he asked what he could put back. Margaret watched as he removed bread, milk, and even diapers. Her heart broke. She walked slowly to the cashier and handed over an envelope, whispering, "Please help him." The cashier nodded, eyes wide. The young man turned around, confused, as the cashier told him his bill was paid. He looked around, searching for the person responsible. Margaret had already turned away, pretending to study a rack of greeting cards. As she walked out into the cold, she felt tears on her cheeks, but they weren't sad tears. They were the kind that come when you feel useful again. That night, Margaret sat at her kitchen table, balancing her checkbook. The numbers were tight. Tighter than usual. She paused. For the first time, doubt crept in. What if I can't afford this anymore? She thought. What if something happens to me? She looked at the empty chair across from her, the one Thomas used to sit in. I hope I'm doing the right thing, she whispered. Weeks passed. Margaret continued her quiet routine, though she reduced the amount she gave. She never stopped completely. Then one afternoon, something unexpected happened. A knock came at her door. Margaret hesitated. She rarely had visitors. When she opened it, she found a woman standing there, holding a small box and smiling nervously. "Are you Margaret Lewis?" the woman asked. "Yes," Margaret replied, confused. The woman's eyes filled with tears. "You don't know me, but you helped my family." Margaret froze. The woman explained that she was the mother who had struggled at the grocery store weeks earlier. The cashier had quietly told her that an older woman with kind eyes had paid for her groceries. "I didn't know your name," the woman said, "but I asked around." The cashier remembered you. She held out the box. Inside was a homemade pie and a handwritten letter. "I was in such a dark place that day," the woman said. "Your kindness reminded me that the world isn't cold. I got a better job last week. Things are turning around. I just wanted to say thank you." Margaret couldn't speak. She simply nodded as tears streamed down her face. After the woman left, Margaret sat down and opened the letter. It ended with the words, "One day, I hope to be the kind of person you were to me." Margaret pressed the letter to her chest, but the story didn't end there. A few days later, Margaret received a call from the church she rarely attended anymore. They told her about a community assistance program they were starting and asked if she would like to volunteer. At first, she almost said no. But then she remembered the letter. She said yes. At the first meeting, Margaret shared her story. She didn't mention names or amounts. She just talked about giving quietly and expecting nothing back. Her story spread. Soon, others began contributing, donating groceries, paying bills anonymously, leaving gift cards for strangers. The small town slowly changed. People smiled more. They helped more. Margaret's secret gift was no longer a secret. But it was never about her. Months later, Margaret received an envelope in the mail. Inside was a check from the church's community fund, labeled "For Your Kindness." She stared at it in disbelief. For the first time in years, Margaret didn't worry about her heating bill that winter. She sat by her window one evening, watching the snow fall, and felt something she hadn't felt since Thomas died: peace. She realized something important then: kindness never disappears. It moves. It multiplies. It finds its way back, often when you need it most. Margaret never stopped giving. She also never stopped receiving, in ways she never expected, and all of it began with a quiet widow, an old purse, and a secret gift. So if you ever wonder whether your small act of kindness matters, remember Margaret. You may never see the impact. You may never be thanked. But somewhere, someone's life could be changing because of you, and that is a gift worth giving.